Hello, everybody. Welcome to this edition of SBE Council's Small Business Insider Live. We are a live stream program specifically geared towards small businesses, entrepreneurs, anybody interested in small business policy. And again, this is hosted by the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, a membership association specifically for business owners who work to advocate for policy that creates an economic climate that helps small businesses start and grow. So we're excited to have you all here today, and we have as our special guest a familiar face to anyone who watches our Small Business Insider Live, SB Council's Chief Economist Ray Keating. Hi, Ray. How are you?
Good. How are you, Christy?
Good. And you continue to be your ever productive self with the recently released 2017 Small Business Policy Index, which ranks the 50 states according to the cost of their tax systems on small business and entrepreneurs. And those results came out yesterday. People can take a look at those results by visiting sbecouncil.org, and we'll talk a little bit about them today. So as we kick things off, let's talk first about, Ray, in preparing this report, what measures are you looking at to create these ratings on states' tax systems?
Yeah, the Small Business Tax Index 2017, we have 26 different measures this year, tax measures. So it includes all sorts of income taxes, whether it's personal income tax, corporate income tax, because we all know that so many businesses pay the personal rather than the corporate income tax. So we look at both. Capital gains taxes, also whether a state imposes an alternative minimum tax on individuals or businesses. We hear a lot about that at the federal level, but many states have dabbled in that as well. Property tax burdens, consumption taxes. We also look at things like taxes at the gas pump, gas and diesel. So there's a whole range of issues that we look at, and either directly or indirectly, these all impact small businesses and entrepreneurs.
And so are you looking at it, are you trying to get to the point of how small business friendly the state is, whether it's easy for a small business owner to both start and also grow in that state? Is that the ultimate goal in terms of the index?
Yeah, the bottom line here, when you look at all the things on the policy front that can affect businesses, small businesses, entrepreneurs, taxes are at the top of the list. Maybe their regulation and taxes might be tied, but this affects the bottom line of every business. So, what are you in business for? You're in business to make money, to make a living. So this is something that hits the bottom line and is a concern, as I said, to businesses across all sectors. So that's what we're trying to get at here. We're not looking at, measures that just affect manufacturers or just affect high tech. We're looking at all of them across the board.
Well, I mean, as many of our viewers know, I am SB Council's entrepreneur in residence and have a small business. We own a gourmet popcorn company in Alexandria, and I can tell you, in both starting and managing our business, the biggest looming worry or concern is always taxes, particularly compliance and how we comply, ensuring we comply so we're not surprised at the end of the year or at some point in time with some sort of letter from the IRS or our state revenue department. So, and I've always said that taxes are the great unifier, because whether big or small, every business has to worry about taxes. So,
I saw today, it was an interview with the chairman of AT&T. Now, that's a big company. And he was talking about the need for tax reform at the federal level. And he said, listen, we get tax reform through where rates come down and we have incentives for investing. AT&T, which I understand is the largest capital expenditure company in the United States, said we'll even do more. So there you have the biggest companies. But that goes all the way down to the smallest companies as well, that, you need lower tax rates, you need fewer compliance burdens so that we can see entrepreneurship and the economy flourish.
Yeah, of course, because it definitely impacts your growth decisions. When you're looking, particularly as a small business, at growth opportunities, you have to consider what are the tax and compliance burdens that will come along with those growth opportunities. So this is an important component, I think, to help in terms of long-term economic growth moving forward.
Yeah, and it affects the investors that you're also going to for, angel investment, venture capital investment, and so on, they are impacted by, for example, capital gains taxes, and their decisions are going to be affected by those taxes as well.
Sure. So based on the rankings, which are the top 5 states that have the most favorable tax climate for small businesses, and what characteristics push them to the top?
Yeah, the top 5, Nevada, Texas, South Dakota, Wyoming, and the state of Washington. Now, those 5 have a very big issue in common in that they have no income taxes whatsoever. So they don't have personal income taxes, they don't have corporate income taxes, they don't have capital gains taxes, no taxes on interest and dividends for individuals. So that is a huge competitive advantage for those states. I was just talking to a reporter earlier today where we were, again, hitting on these issues. And it was interesting because Nevada's number 1, and she focused on that a little bit. And then we talked about California, which is dead last in our index. And the contrast, from a tax perspective, it could be more stark. But on those issues, those income tax issues, Nevada, there you are, no income tax, no capital gains taxes. California seems to go out of its way to keep those taxes very high and punishing. So you can see the difference in terms of these are policy decisions. It's not just, whether I like the climate, the weather, certain things about the state, whether they have sports teams or don't, or, all the reasons that we pick, these our places to live and so on. Policy matters, and policy is not inevitable. Decisions can be made to make vast improvements in your state if elected officials choose to do so.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, if you look at the politics of it, Washington, definitely components of Washington that are more progressive, yet they have a very competitive business tax policy, versus some of the, like a Wyoming or whatever the case that tends to be more conservative. So it's interesting to see in the top 5 states with unique politics still both focused on creating a tax policy that is beneficial to business growth.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. With Washington, I guess you would say it's more of a blue or a purple state. And then, there are other states like Idaho, which is as red as you can get. It's one of the most Republican states, but they don't rank so well. They're ranked, I'm going to get it straight, 35th on our index. So it's not, and we've seen this in New Mexico. New Mexico is an interesting example because if you look over an extended period of time for like the last 15, 20 years, they've made some significant improvements in their tax system overall. What's fascinating is that early on it was driven by a Democratic governor, and at other times it's been driven by Republicans in the state. So, I think as an economist, I imagine a day where sound economics is bipartisan. Maybe, again, the states are a fascinating place to look because they're laboratories of democracy. Sure. And when we talk about all these things going on in Washington, Washington tends to be behind the curve, if you will. And if we look at the states, we can see where some really interesting trends are developing. For example, right now we have the debate in Washington about tax reform. Now, if you look at a state like North Carolina, they have transformed their tax system in a pro-growth way in the last few years. So they used to rank terribly on our index, on our measures, and now they're in the top 10 because they've made substantial movement towards a pro-growth tax system.
So what about the worst offenders, the states that are the least favorable to entrepreneurship and small business growth?
Yeah, I mentioned California. They're dead last, unfortunately. It's a beautiful. It's one of those things that I've been to California a couple times, and I get it. I understand why people live there. It's a beautiful state, but man, in terms of a policy perspective and a tax perspective, the elected officials there make it really difficult for people to stay. So California, New Jersey, Maine, who else? Minnesota and Iowa are the bottom 5.
Okay.
And then you throw in Hawaii, Vermont, New York, so that kind of rounds out the bottom states there. Some of those states I think people expect to see. There might be a couple in there that they're a little surprised about, maybe Iowa, but Iowa's had tax issues for a very long time. So it's a mix of size and types of states and where they're located. But again, it all comes down, as I said before, comes back to the decisions made by elected officials.
And in those states that are least favorable, what are some of the biggest challenges? Is it high business tax rates, high income tax rates, or are there specific tax policy items that just make it really challenging for businesses there?
It's everything. Yeah. I mean, that's when you rank last at the bottom, towards the bottom of our index, you've got to be doing a lot of things wrong. But even the best states, the ones that rank the best, Nevada, number one, but they still have high consumption taxes, right? But that's fine because they have no income taxes and their property taxes are pretty reasonable and so on. So you're always going to have something that's a challenge.
Sure.
From a taxpayer perspective. But in states like California and New Jersey, and I live in New York, I'll pick on New York, they do everything wrong, unfortunately. It's very hard to find an area. You might find one or two items where you're like, oh, that's not too bad. But in terms of the big issues, especially the individual income taxes, capital gains, corporate income taxes, property taxes, sales, they do it all wrong. So you've got a long way to go in those states. And I think that's something that, voters have to wake up to, that, little nibbling around the edges isn't going to cut it in states like that. Now, if that nibbling at the edges gets things rolling, gets some momentum going towards serious tax relief, well, that's great. You have to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But it's time for these states, these elected officials to realize, they do have to start somewhere and they have to get serious about it. We had a corporate tax reform in New York, so-called, a few years ago. And everybody was very excited. Corporate tax reform, we're going to make ourselves competitive. And New York is notorious for running television commercials saying how great things are in the state now. But in reality, sure, there were a couple of things that were done that were minor in a positive direction. But guess what? The bulk of the state's population, downstate, businesses actually face a higher corporate income tax. So we supposedly had tax reform, but the tax rate's higher. So, these are the problems in places like New York and California and New Jersey. Even when there's some hope that something's going to happen, they wind up messing it up somehow.
Yeah. And I think also in states like California and New York, just the compliance burdens, it can really push small business owners off when you make it so complicated to start a business. I'm not sure if that's part of the index. I know SB Council also has a small business policy index,
right.
But compliance burden, I think, for a lot of prospective entrepreneurs is a big factor when you have to go through so many hoops to get something off the ground. It really can deter someone from taking that leap into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, think about all the headaches and the costs you have to go through. And now we're all finally set so we can pay amongst the highest taxes in the country. Yay, right? Yeah. So it tends to go hand in hand. And that's the case with regulation in general. When you look at our broader small business policy index, as you said, the states with high tax burdens also tend to be the states with high regulatory burdens. They tend to go together because there's this attitude that, I've talked to many elected officials over the years, including ones that are very much in favor of higher taxes and more regulation. And they work under a very strange assumption. They just assume that business is going to go on.
Yeah.
And investors are going to invest and entrepreneurs are going to create wonderful things. And the tax and regulatory burden doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And when you operate under a system like that, you're going to have a very troubled economy, to say the least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. You mentioned something, states are like our little democracies. And, you mentioned that Congress and the administration is currently working on trying to do large scale tax reform on the federal level. But what can state legislatures and governors do to better attract businesses, to encourage both entrepreneurship and better attract larger businesses to their area?
It's for the most part, there are states that do things wrong, as we know, but for the most part, there have been some exciting things going on in the states in recent years. You have governors and legislators, easy for me to say, that have recognized they need to make their states more competitive. So again, North Carolina, I'll use that as an example again, went from one of the least competitive states from a tax perspective to one of the most competitive. So it's all about bringing those tax and regulatory costs down in a broad way, because you don't want to get caught in that, I'm going to give tax breaks to certain companies and not to others. That game, that doesn't work. You do it broad, on a broad base, in a broad-based way, and that way entrepreneurs can flourish in ways that certainly politicians didn't imagine. Yeah. So that's the key. And again, I think at the federal level, there are plenty of states, in addition to North Carolina. Indiana has done this in recent years. Ohio has done it. Arizona has done it. And some of these, I mentioned New Mexico, and some of these are still in the midst of, a multi-year tax relief or tax reform package. So there are some good examples in the states. There are others that, New York, I don't think you want to look at them. A strange thing in Kansas. Kansas has been a positive, I would argue, under Governor Sam Brownback. They've moved dramatically. They moved dramatically in the right direction. But then legislators started focusing on government spending rather than tax relief, and they've had a big battle there. Yeah. They finally overrode the governor's veto and actually put through a substantial tax increase. So that's a state where you were dramatically moving in the right direction, and now all of a sudden they slammed on the brakes and started to retreat. Mm-hmm. Not a good example. Also, there's one other state that was like that. I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh, Maine. Maine had some nice tax relief going on, and then they put a measure on the ballot to hike the highest income tax rate. And sure enough, unfortunately, voters narrowly approved that. So there have been some states that are doing this ping pong thing, moving in the right direction, in the wrong direction. Consistency is critical, moving in the right direction. And also, one other thing that I'll mention, because we've seen it at the federal level in the past, and we see it in some states where there seems to be this trend towards a long phase-in of tax relief. Yeah. Nice, in certain ways. Listen, I'll take any tax relief I can get, but the longer it takes to phase it in, the longer, the further out the benefits are, sure. And the risk of, elected officials reversing course like we've seen in Kansas. So the more immediate tax relief and tax reform, the better. Yeah.
And again, I think it's important for legislators, both on the state level as well as the federal level, to understand that, many small businesses pay taxes based on individual income levels, that so much of their personal tax situation is combined with their business tax situation or business income. So it's not as clean as easy as just a, straight up like corporate tax decrease or business tax decrease. That it's really important to look at the full picture of tax reform to provide a better climate for business creation and business growth altogether. I tend to feel like a lot of times, both on the state level and on the federal level, they look at things in silos. They look at what can we do on the corporate side, and then what can they do on the small business side, and then what they can do on the individual income tax side. But for a small business owner especially, all of that is tied together when thinking about, again, starting and managing and growing their business. So I know it's politically challenging to try and address it comprehensively, but that really is where we get the best result in terms of economic growth.
No, you're absolutely right, and that comprehensive term is key. If you're going to talk about tax reform, it needs to be comprehensive. Mm-hmm. Tax relief is fine if you want to just provide a corporate tax cut, for example. I'm all in favor of that. Super, fantastic. I'm on board. I'll help you out. Mm-hmm. But if you want to talk about reform, it has to be across the board. And there's a local issue that plays out the same way. Property taxes, which we include in our index, it's not unusual for local officials and state officials to talk about residential property tax relief, mm-hmm. Which is, I live in New York. Believe me, if you saw my property tax bill, you'd be saying, what are you doing there? So I get it. We need that. But they rarely talk about commercial and industrial property tax relief. So again, what you see is this split, and you see that businesses wind up getting increased property tax burdens if we see any residential relief. So that, again, that's an issue where it needs to be comprehensive. And by the way, you mentioned you can't silo this on both ends with property taxes, because a business owner with a facility is going to be paying commercial property taxes on that facility.
Yeah.
But he or she is also paying property taxes on the home, right? Their own personal home, and then they also have to attract and keep people, right?
Yeah, sure.
And if it's very difficult to live in an area because of high property taxes, well, guess what? It's very difficult to attract good people and keep them. Yeah. So again, the comprehensive view works best.
And that's a challenge. I know I'm in the Northern Virginia area, the DC metro area. It's very expensive to live here. And, we find that trying to find, our workers are coming from farther and farther away because it's more cost effective to live out those ways. So when you're looking at things like property tax, it's also important to workforce development issues as well. Moving forward. So, anything else? Again, just want to reiterate, anyone could take a look at the 2017 Small Business Tax Index released by the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, written by Ray Keating, our Chief Economist, at sbcouncil.org. You can read the full report. But are there any other findings you want to highlight for our viewers?
I think the only thing I would emphasize, maybe to close it out, is for when business owners look at this, use it. Don't just, if you live in one of those states that is in the lower 25, don't just get aggravated. Use that information and go to your, state and local elected officials and say to them, listen, what are we going to do about this? Because I've always said, as a business owner, you have more clout. And you may not realize it, but you have more clout with elected officials. So use this in a constructive way and help to make your state more competitive.
I couldn't agree more. It's so important to use information like this to try and make change in this day and age where economy is such a big focus and job creation. Small businesses have a lot of leverage to try and create a much more favorable environment that allows them to grow and create more jobs. So thanks so much, Ray, for your time today. All of our viewers, please again go visit the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council at sbecouncil.org. You can find the 2017 Small Business Tax Index there, along with our Small Business Policy Index, which we released earlier this year, which will give you a great picture of your state and how well they're doing for small businesses. You can also follow us on social media. You can follow us on Twitter at SBE Council. We also have a Facebook page. And if you're a small business owner, consider taking the time to join our association, become part of our network, and help us with all of the advocacy activities that we're involved in to try and create better small business policy. Thank you again. Thanks, Ray. We appreciate it, and come take a look at Small Business Insider Live next week as well. Thanks.